I want to preach this morning on beloved community. I'm doing this for several reasons. Number one, it was the theme of the Canvass recently all but concluded. And I'm always inclined to say, well, where did these terms come from? Who cooked up this idea of beloved community? What were they trying to do about that when they said that? Also, as the interim minister, I've got kind of an agenda to try to tighten up some of the systems and organizational structures of the congregation in such a manner that I can give the new minister you're going to call probably about a year from now, probably a year from this month, a running start and a good spring off the springboard and help in that way, in those ways. And one of the ways that I think I can do that is to help you, encourage you to adopt a congregational covenant. You have a covenant of right relations, which is kind of which is a way to help people act appropriately. You know, you're not allowed to call people names and so on and so forth. But a covenant is a broader thing than that, and I want to talk a little bit about that. So, and I want to maybe, if I meet great resistance, I'll go nowhere with this. But I'm hoping not to meet resistance, but to share why I think it might be a helpful thing, and to invite us to collectively investigate various church covenants and whether we want to adopt one and what it might look like, or maybe we can write our own. So anyway, so that's what I'm going to talk about. Now, this beloved community was actually a favorite expression of the Reverend Martin Luther King's. And he used it to describe what he considered to be the end, the goal of social action and of religion. Beloved community. What did he mean? What was he talking about? Now, the term beloved community was first coined about 110, 20 years ago by the American philosopher Josiah Royce, one of his many books, of which Rachel read earlier. And he was an influential professor at Harvard University from 1882 to 1912, and a colleague on the philosophy department with George Santayana there, and Alfred North Whitehead, a couple others, and William James. So he's a California native. He was born in 1882 in Grass Valley when hardly anybody lived there. It was a deserted gold miner community, and I think I read once that he said he was born, he thinks, in a tent. But anyway, he went on to great accolades globally. Now, the idea of beloved community, adopted from the writings of Royce, became central to the theology of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. And Gandhi, too. I'll talk a little about that. But first, Royce. My life means nothing, Royce wrote shortly before the First World War, either theoretically or practically, unless I am a member of a community. And Gandhi later said, individuals do not exist apart from community. But anyway, Royce held that not every collection of individuals is, in fact, a community. Community can only exist, he believed, where individual members are in communication with one another, so that there is, to some extent and in some relevant aspect, a congruence of feeling, thought, and will among them. Now, connecting to a community's history and mission create a sense of a common past and shared future among its members, which then becomes the basis of the loyalty it inspires. Some communities are defined by loyalty to a cause or spirit that harmonizes all disputatious inclinations. Royce referred to communities of this type as genuine communities or communities of grace. Other communities are defined by a vicious or predatory loyalty toward, tending anyway, toward the destruction of other causes and loyalties. A good example, it seems to me, is the Westboro Baptist Church, founded by the late Reverend Fred Phelps from Topeka, I think, Kansas. And that Baptist Church descended on the Walnut Creek Unitarian Universalist Church 5 weeks ago in a fit of homophobic vitriol. And they also boycotted many funerals of returning veterans that they had ascribed that, for one reason or another, they thought were gay or lesbian or what have you. But beyond the actual communities that we directly encounter in daily life, Royce also posited an ideal, the beloved community, made up of all those who would be fully dedicated to the cause of loyalty, truth, and reality itself. Josiah Royce stressed that the sharing of individuals' feelings, thoughts, and wills that occurs in healthy communities does not imply a mystical blurring or annihilation of their personal identities. Individuals remain individuals, but when we join a community, we attain a kind of second-order life that extends beyond any of our individual lives. All genuine communities, Royce believed, are united by a guiding or interpreting spirit, as suggested by the familiar UU covenant, not here, but maybe those of you who've visited other churches are familiar. Love is the spirit of this church, and service its law, so on and so forth. It's number 473 in the hymnal. If you want to look, you're allowed. I won't be distracted. And I bring it up again in a minute, 473. Now, Royce held that religion is the sphere of life in which finite human beings are able to get in touch with the infinite source of wisdom and guidance that he, and later Martin Luther King, considered the ultimate guiding spirit, God. Mahatma Gandhi believed in an ultimate guiding spirit too, which he referred to not so often as God, but as Satyagraya, or the soul force that links. It's kind of a binding, interconnecting spirit from linking soul to soul. And why through nonviolence, you can actually change the hearts of your oppressors by linking, by recognizing their humanity, your link to their soul, such that it awakens in them their link to your soul, and they cease from their hateful and destructive endeavors. All three of these men, Royce, Gandhi, and Martin King, believed that engagement in a loyal, loving community guided by a divine spirit and devoted to the highest ideals of goodness was the best recipe for generating religious insight. Our Unitarian Universalist ancestors shared this understanding. Now, both Josiah Royce and Martin King were what you might call Unitarian leading Christians. It's interesting that King, being a Baptist, you'd think that he would talk, instead of the beloved community, would use the more conventional Christian term, the body of Christ, or the risen Christ. In Christ there is no Greek nor Jew, slave nor free, male nor female, but all are one in Christ. But he didn't. He stuck always, he was more of a humanist than many people realize, and he stuck to this notion of beloved community. Now, both Gandhi and King and Royce were, as I said, Unitarian-leaning Christians, and both affirmed the idea of divine incarnation. Not so much the incarnation of God in Jesus, but rather the incarnation of the living Spirit in communities of faith. For both men, the church's primary importance is as a paradigm of healthy community. Creeds and doctrines may change, and particular congregations may or may not actually be communities of grace. What matters in the end is the process of communicating and understanding one another, or trying to, in actual, imperfect, finite communities of grace, bound together by loyalty and striving toward the ultimate and ideal beloved community. So beloved community is then an ideal that inspires actual real-life communities in their attempt to get along with one another in the healthiest way possible, and also that helps individuals within that community grow in insight. One can appreciate why Dr. King considered it so important. Royce understood that some non-religious communities are, in fact, genuine, while many so-called religious communities are not communities of grace at all. Like Fred Phelps' Westboro Baptists, such groups are hateful and dedicated to destroying the loyalties of those with whom they disagree. Though they didn't write philosophical tomes on the subject, our Unitarian and Universalist forebears clearly shared Josiah Royce's understanding when it came to nurturing healthy communities. In their case, congregational communities. And they had a way, the New England way, it's been called ever since, for helping foster such, and it was congregational covenants. Covenants are essentially sacred agreements, sacred contracts. A contract is kind of a legal thing, and it's kind of designed to, save your butt. So you can't get sued later and so on. But a covenant is more designed to inspire your heart, okay? It's not about avoiding risk. It's about trusting in and having hope for mutual redemption, mutual salvation, for living up to your highest hopes. Now, as I said, covenants are essentially sacred contracts. Marriage vows are covenantal. Most of us would agree that they are more than just an agreement and more than a legal document, although they are a legal document. But it's because they're more than just that, that's one reason why divorce is typically so traumatic and so wrenching an experience to go through. The first settlers arriving in New England mostly came here in an attempt to establish the kinds of communities Royce later identified as genuine or graceful. The early colonists spent a great deal of time and prayer in efforts to order their churches and civil communities in such a way that individuals therein would remain in communication with one another and nurture the congruence of feeling, thought, and will that they knew would be necessary if truly wholesome communities were to follow. And what they came up with as a way to do that were congregational covenants. Freely agreed to sacred agreements that bound individual members to the whole, that is, binding each individual member to the church's other members and to the church's history and its mission. The churches are communities of hope and of memory. So the covenant binds us not just to one another, but to those who bequeath this place to us and their loyalties, and to the people that we know will follow, and we're looking forward to joining us. And to being open to a guiding spirit. Now, these New England forebears tried to keep these covenants simple and easily remembered, like the Salem Church Covenant of 1629, which if you go to Salem, Massachusetts today, they still repeat. It's got funny Elizabethan spelling, but it says, "We covenant with the Lord and with one another, and do bind ourselves in the presence of God to walk together in all his ways, according as he is pleased to reveal himself unto us in his blessed word of truth." So we bind ourselves to one another and to God, or to this guiding spirit, to walk together in the ways that are revealed to us of that which is most sacred and holy, as we understand it, or as we discover it. Now, over the generations, many of these congregational covenants were ignored and some abandoned altogether. Here at UUCIL, our covenant groups all have covenants, but the congregation as a whole does not. You do have a covenant of right relations, outlining guidelines for appropriate behavior, but no regular old church covenant. In an attempt to remedy that, I will try introducing in the coming months 10 to 12 different covenants that are in common use among contemporary Unitarian Universalist groups. I can tell you right now that across our association as a whole, the two most popular are first, number 473 in Singing the Living Tradition, "Love is the spirit of this church and service its law." This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. It was written in the late 19th century by James Vila Blake, a Unitarian minister in the Chicago area. First in, some little church, and then later in Evanston. The second most popular denomination-wide is number 471, which reads as follows: "Love is the doctrine of this church, the quest of truth, its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve humanity in fellowship, to the end that all souls shall grow in harmony with the divine. This do we covenant with each other and with God." A little wordier, clearly a little more theocentric. This covenant was composed by L. Griswold Williams back in the early 30s, and Williams was a Universalist. You can, if you know that theologically more centered in God, it's more Universalist. And he served the Universalist Church in Rochester, New York, for like 45 years. Meanwhile, on May 6th, a month from today, you all will have your annual meeting. And there's a lot on the warrant: the election of officers, the election of a ministerial search committee, and voting on next year's budget. So we will not be voting on a church covenant then. Too much business already. But we will, I think, I'm going to try to weasel this out of you, a straw vote sometime before the end of the fiscal year on June 30th, or early next fall. Now, I've encouraged this at many of the churches I've served. In Santa Fe, sentiments were kind of pretty close between the James Vila Blake and the L. Griswold Williams compositions, until one of our more musical members decided to try her hand at a covenant that we could all sing, and ended up carrying the day. And because I said, one of the problems with the 7 principles, I've been reciting them for 35 years, and I still don't have them memorized, because they're not very singable, And if you really want to memorize something, it's like we were talking yesterday at Chili's memorial service. She had 100 campfire songs. Well, she knew them all. Songs you remember, and people in doing hospice work say that it's one way you can really connect with people who are increasingly enfeebled, psycho-emotionally, but they remember these songs, and they will remember how meaningful they were in their lives. My mom always sang torch songs, she called them, while she was doing housework, and she had Alzheimer's and she went, but we could hum those songs and she would start singing them right along. So yes, you can write your own. You can even write your own musical for people who are musically inclined. Regarding Unitarian Universalists' two most popular covenants, I find myself personally leaning toward the L. Griswold Williams composition, mostly because the guiding spirit he identifies in the final couplet, to the end that all souls shall grow in harmony with the divine, thus do we covenant with each other and with God. Now, I don't believe in the God you guys don't believe in, so don't worry about that. Just don't. But I'm talking much more about this guiding spirit or this collective, this linking of souls. Now, Griswold, of course, being an old universalist, believed that the whole universe grew out of a divine matrix, and that ultimately everything would be reabsorbed back into that matrix, or recognized as always being part of that, all souls being reunited with their source. But even so, and whatever one's concept of the deity or no deity, loyalty to a guiding spirit, love in Blake's covenant, or the divine in Williams, can be recognized in either proposal, and I think in the engagement of congregations. And either would be, from my point of view, a welcome and helpful addition in all congregational life, not just here. We have a lot to discuss and vote on a month from today. Important as these decisions are, nothing, it seems to me, is more important than adopting your own congregational covenant. Covenants, by the way, are not something that anyone's supposed to be good at. To actually dwell together peacefully, seek truth lovingly, and regularly help one another is hard work, as anybody who's ever been married can testify. But remember this, congregational covenants are a practice. They're a practice. It's an agreement to strive toward, fully aware that we can and will, at best, only approximate its vision of beloved community. In the real world of conflicting ideas and personalities, nurturing genuine community is a serious challenge. As our country, as a whole, the community of the USA over the last few years has made abundantly clear. Remember, covenants are not something anyone can do easily. They're a practice inspired by an ideal. By adopting either of the aforementioned covenants or any other, or writing and adopting your own, I am fully convinced this cannot hurt us, it cannot hurt you, and it may help everyone. Remember that despite disagreements, we can and will remain a healthy, mutually respectful congregation. I'm confident that that can happen. I'm confident seeking to do so is a good thing. And I'm going to do what I can over the months ahead to help make it happen. One more thing. When a person enters into a congregational covenant, he or she puts themselves in relationship with the congregation and has obligations and responsibilities relative to it rather than individuals in the congregation that he or she selects. The obligations and responsibilities in that covenant with the congregation have to do with how the individual treats other people, including people she or he may not be all that crazy about. Expand this model beyond the congregation, and it's easy to see why Dr. Martin Luther King found it so hopeful and meaningful. But within the congregation, it's helpful in that it becomes a vital and hopeful way to practice living as a whole person in a whole community with whole women and men and children, which it seems to me is what congregational life should be all about. The truth is, and this is the truth, You already do a pretty good job of this here at UUCIL. And I'm not just flattering you, because I've been around a lot of churches, and you actually treat each other pretty respectfully and kindly. I mean, not all the time, mind you, but most of the time. But we can always find inspiration in wholesome ideals and good practices. We can always learn new, more respectful ways to interact and carry on. We can always grow, both as individuals and as a community of care and commitment. Let us resolve to do so. Amen.